Hi there. I am back with another FineLine Paint Applicator demonstration. I've been doing all these little examples on these little cardstock tags that I had left over from a project of binding a book. I've been having a lot of fun doing this and doing different experiments and trying different things. My goal is to learn as much as I can about the FineLine Applicator and what we can do with it. So this time what I'm going to do is I typically use craft paint in my applicator, but I've been experimenting. I put glycerin in it now and I put matte medium in it. I do not purchase really expensive product. However, I do have this Daler-Rowney liquid acrylic. I've had it for a couple years. I don't use it very much. I am going to put some of this acrylic, liquid acrylic, in the 20 gauge FineLine applicator. This is my first time using fluid acrylic in a FineLine applicator, and I put it in this fine tip one because it is a very fluid medium. So we're just going to experiment with it on here first and see what happens. Isn't that pretty? However, I do feel it already starting to clog. And I'm not sure. This is an ink and it shouldn't be doing that. I'm finding that this fluid acrylic tends to clog in here. I do not have any airbrush media or anything else in here. I am going to mix some airbrush medium. Let's set this aside. I'm going to mix some airbrush media in here. Let's see what happens by mixing some airbrush medium in here. And I'm going to put several drops in here. And let's see. This will thin it down a lot, but it's clumping in my, it is clumping in the tip of this 20 gauge FineLine tip. Now, since we are experimenting, this made quite a thick line. Let's see. Now it's still I guess it's flowing now. It's very liquidy, so I don't find that it's giving me, and it tends to clump in there. Like I am pressing really hard on this, and hardly nothing's coming out. Okay. This is a 20 gauge fine tip, and I was thinking I could use this for a fluid acrylic, but it is clogging up on me. I do have a standard tip. I put airbrush media in here, and I put in several drops of it, but I do not like how it's clogging up on this. I'm going to go wash this out right away, and I'm going to put a standard tip on this bottle. I will be right back. I switched to a standard, even though this says fine tip. The yellow cap here tells me that I am putting a standard tip on this because I don't want to dump the ink out of this bottle. I do sort of like what's going on here, but there is, and this is a flow acrylic, like a high flow acrylic. This is a fluid acrylic, so there is some dripping on here. That's to be expected. I'm going to try another one with the standard tip, which will give me again a thicker line, but I want to see if it comes through the tip of the fine liner, the nozzle of the fine liner, easier. I'm just going to let it drip into lines here. This is a fluid acrylic, so it's coming out in very thick lines. I'm not sure this is something that I would paint detailed lace with. If you were on a large page and if you wanted big thick lines like this, I think it might work, but you're going to get dribbles and drops, because it's very fluid media, very fluid. I do like the fluidity of it for certain applications. For drawing lace, I'm not sure, because look how this bubbles. And it's going to take some time for this to dry. And I want it to dry flat. Let's just bring some lines like this. Let's just... Let's use my palette knife to draw out some of these lines here, since this is a very fluid. And here again, this is experimenting. This is seeing what my media and my tools can do. I wouldn't say this is especially beautiful. It kind of got a big puddle there. Let's... Ooh, I like that. Now I'm getting away from my fine liner into palette knife action here. But I do like it. And it's still lacy. Look at this big blobble here. Okay, I'm going to stop here and let this dry as it is. I kind of like the drops in there. Let's set this one aside. I'm not sure that the fluid acrylic is the one to start this on, but one thing that I wanted you, so I have this cardstock album that I purchased on sale for probably $1. I'm going to take these out of the rings. I'm going to grab pages and work on examples. And my fluid acrylic is going to be very drippy here, but I want to show what can be done. So we're just going to let this, we're going to attempt to draw some lace. We're going to make this design very simple. Because this is a very fluid process. Well, let's just kind of connect it. Our lines do not have to be perfectly beautiful round here. And let's do some dots if we can. You know I like my dots. And let's just keep looping this around. So I am experimenting with fluid acrylic in my fine liner. I first put it in, there's a bubble, air bubble there. I first put it in my fine tip 20 gauge, and it really clogged up that 20 gauge. So I added airbrush medium to it, thinking that if I made it thinner, then it would flow easier. But it's still clogged up in that 20 gauge. Whoa. It's still clogged up in that 20 gauge applicator. It does not seem to be clogging up in the, and I could be lying to you there, in the standard tip. But I do see that it gets little air bubbles. And it comes out in puddles. Now that could be because I added airbrush media to it. And that could be with the there. So let's just draw some lines out this way. I do like this. I'm not sure that fluid acrylic, unless you're on a very large canvas or page and you want a very loose media, a very loose design, you don't want to control your design. I'm not sure if, and look, see, it's clogged up. Whoa! I squirted it. I'm going to leave that. It was clogging up on me, so I pressed hard on it and I squirted a big squirt of it out there. So if you're working on a canvas and if you're working really loose, this might be a media to try in your fine liner. But if you want a lot of control, I'm not sure that this is the media to put in here. Instead of putting airbrush media, I might have put matte medium or something to make it less fluid. But then that would have been defeating the purpose. And look at that big blob of... I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave it. Look at how it bubbles up. I'm just going to put dots over in here. The whole purpose of doing these demonstrations is to experiment and see what works with your different tools and your different medias and what works in them and how you can control that. Now, as I work more with this and with the fine liners, I may find a perfect application someday for this. Who knows? I'm going to stop here. It's got that big blob there. I'm going to keep that for documentation. I'm going to... We're going to grab on to my first one here. And I'm curious as to how this is drying. It's not dry. It's still very wet. And this one, of course, is very wet, but it's very shiny and pretty. And I imagine because of the metallic in here, I'm going to go wash out even the standard... I'm going to go wash out the standard tip before I close it up and quit, because I do not want it clogging up. Even that, I may eventually remove this ink and put it back into the bottle. I'm not sure that this is something that I would always use in my fine liner, but it's an experiment, and that's the whole point. So I cleaned this one out. What I want to try now is some calligraphy ink. Calligraphy ink is not an acrylic, and I think it's more fluid, and I think that it will not tend to clog up as much. I do need to put it in here though. This is a water-soluble ink, so it will, unless I put a fixative on it, it will be, I can move it around with my, which could be an advantage. So I'm just going to, I have a white piece that's about the same size as my black pieces, because I don't think the brown will show up too much on the black paper. So I'm just going to draw a border here. Ooh, do I like this? It's very juicy though, and it comes out of the fine liner tip in blobs. I'm not sure about writing with this. Let's see if I can't take my brush and lift some of this. That's a lot of ink. I just want to say here that from my experiments with the fluid acrylic ink and just even doing this with the calligraphy ink, my first impression is you might be just as content using a dip pen. You have a lot more control with a dip pen than you do with that fine liner. Now, if you're going for a very artsy page, but if you want something very controlled, this may not be it, because it's very, I find it's very hard to control what's going on here, and it's very juicy. I will probably empty this ink back out into its original container here. Okay, I wanted to kind of talk about this, kind of give a little summary of my findings here. I used a liquid acrylic, Daler-Rowney liquid acrylic in my fine liners. I first used it in the 20 gauge, which is a fine nozzle. And I found that it did not take long before this was clogging up the nozzle, even after I put airbrush medium in it. So I switched to a standard tip, and it did seem to work a lot better, but I find that with this acrylic ink, it tends to come out in a very thick line, and I do not have much control. It is pretty, but if you're looking for something with a lot of control, I would not use fluid acrylic in there. Now, if you're working on an art journal page and you just want to jazz up your page, this might be something fun to try. It's very pearlescent. This is a pearlescent acrylic. I don't have one that's not pearlescent. That may have a lot to do about why it's clogging up the tip here, because the pearlescent probably has some mica powder in it that finds its way into the channel of that nozzle. I did find that it worked better in the standard tip, but it's still a very thick line and very hard to control. It will come out into a blob, and just, if you want to do controlled work, that's not the way to go. Still fun. Then I switched to Higgins Sepia Calligraphy ink, and I used that in the 20 gauge nozzle. Let's get this out of the way. And I found it almost as hard to control. It certainly did not clog up the nozzle, but it just was not easy to draw a line. But I'm glad I tried this, because now I know what works and what doesn't work. I would only give this experiment maybe a C plus. However, I'm not unhappy with it either. I love the textures in here. I love what's happening in here, but it's not something, if you want to do very fine detailed work, these are not product that you want to put in your fine liner to do it. I'm very happy with the fine liners, but what you put in there makes a difference. So thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next page.